comes a point when you're just tired. Not the kind of tired that a nap can fix. Not even the kind of tired that comes after a long day of physical labor. No, this is a deeper kind of exhaustion. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that follows you even when you're doing all the right things. You're showing up. You're trying. You're giving your all. And yet, nothing is moving. It's like yelling into the wind. You pour everything you have into your work, your relationships, your growth, but life doesn't seem to respond. Not really. Not in the way you hoped it would. And so, silently, you begin to wonder, is it me? Am I broken? Did I do something wrong? That's the part no one really talks about. The part where your heart starts to whisper doubts that your mind can't ignore. Because we've been taught, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that effort is everything. That if you just try hard enough, you'll win. That the more exhausted you are, the more dedicated you must be. But what if that's not true? What if exhaustion isn't a sign of laziness, but a sign that you've been emotionally sprinting for too long without rest, without results? You see, there's a dangerous myth woven into our culture. The myth that effort always equals progress. That if you're stuck, it must mean you're not trying hard enough. That if things aren't working, it's your fault. But sometimes, the truth is far less personal. Sometimes, what you're feeling isn't failure, it's friction. It's what happens when you keep pushing against a door that's not meant to open yet, or not meant for you at all. And the more you push, the more tired you become. Not just physically, but spiritually. You start to feel like you're losing pieces of yourself in the process. But here's a thought. What if the answer isn't to push harder, but to pause? What if the burnout you feel is not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long in the wrong direction? The Stoic philosophers, like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, didn't believe in chasing everything down with force. They believed in aligning yourself with nature, with reason, with what is. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In other words, peace isn't something we chase. It's something we create by choosing to stop wrestling with life and start flowing with it. Let that sink in for a moment. Because there's a huge difference between trying and aligning. Trying says, I need to make this work no matter what. Aligning says, let me find where I fit and move from there. Trying says, if I don't succeed, I've failed. Aligning says, if it's not meant for me, I'll let it go with grace. And when you make that shift from force to flow, something changes. Your mind softens. Your heart breathes a little easier. You stop blaming yourself for everything that's out of your control, and you begin to reclaim your energy. Because let's be honest, much of your life, have you spent chasing things just because you felt like you had to? How many sleepless nights, anxious mornings, or long to-do lists have you survived, only to realize none of it brought the peace you were promised? If you're nodding along right now, I want you to know this. You're not alone. We've all been there. You're not weak for feeling tired. You're not lazy for needing rest. And you're not broken just because the results haven't come yet. You're human. You're trying. And maybe it's time to try something different. The Stoics didn't teach us to give up. They didn't promote passivity. What they taught at its core was clarity. They taught us to ask better questions. Is this in my control? Is this worth my energy? Is this aligned with who I am? And if the answer is nothing, maybe the most courageous thing you can do is let go. That doesn't mean quitting. That means trusting. It means believing that life isn't something to be wrestled into shape, but something to walk through with presence, with wisdom, with steady feet and a steady heart. And that's hard, I know, especially in a world that rewards the grind. Especially when silence feels like failure and stillness feels unsafe. But trust me, there's another way. You don't have to wear yourself down to prove your worth. You don't have to run yourself into the ground to feel valuable. You already are. And maybe, just maybe, this moment right now, this pause you're taking to reflect is the very beginning of something new. Not a new strategy, not a new goal, but a new way of being. One rooted not in performance, but in peace. One rooted not in chasing, but in clarity. Because the weight of trying isn't always yours to carry. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop, breathe, and remind yourself. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to realign. You're allowed to trust the process 7 when it doesn't move at your pace. This isn't the end. This is the invitation. An invitation to walk a different path. Not the one paved with exhaustion, but the one lit by awareness. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt guilty for resting? Like the moment you sit down, your brain whispers, "You should be doing more." As if stillness means you're falling behind. As if slowing down means you're somehow losing the race. That isn't just your inner critic talking. That's conditioning. We live in a culture that celebrates hustle, glorifies burnout, and ties our worth to our productivity. From a young age, we're taught that effort equals value. The more you grind, the more you matter. The more you achieve, the more you earn the right to exist without shame. But here's the truth, no one teaches you. Effort doesn't always equal alignment. Sometimes, constant movement is just noise. Sometimes, doing more is a way to avoid feeling what's underneath. And sometimes, the stillness you avoid is the very clarity you need. See, the problem isn't effort itself. Effort is beautiful when it's directed with purpose. But effort without awareness? That's where people lose themselves. That's where burnout hides in plain sight disguised as ambition. It's easy to confuse motion with meaning. You wake up early, stay busy, check off tasks, but deep down, you feel empty. Like no matter how much you do, it's never enough. Why? Because you're chasing validation, not connection. You're running toward an idea of success that was never yours to begin with. And that's the trap. When we tie our worth to performance, we start living to prove instead of living to be. We measure ourselves by what we can produce, not by how we feel. And eventually, we reach a breaking point mentally, physically, or spiritually. That's where Stoic wisdom becomes a lifeline. The Stoics never taught us to strive endlessly. They taught us to examine our efforts, to ask, is this in line with nature? Is this necessary? Is this leading me closer to peace or just deeper into pressure? Marcus Aurelius didn't measure greatness by busyness. He measured it by inner stillness, by how calmly a person could carry themselves amidst the chaos of the world. So what if your stillness isn't laziness? What if it's your system asking for a pause? What if your body, your soul, your mind is trying to realign with something deeper, something more authentic? You don't need to prove your worth through constant motion. You already have worth. Full stop. So the next time you feel that pressure to keep grinding, take a breath. Ask yourself not what more can I do, but what truly matters right now. Because maybe stillness isn't failure at all. Maybe it's wisdom in disguise. We've been taught that control equals strength. That the tighter you grip the wheel, the safer you'll be. That the more you plan, predict, and push, the better your life will unfold. But what if that's a lie we've all been sold? Because real strength, real power doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like trust. And I don't mean blind, passive, fingers crossed kind of trust. I'm talking about conscious trust, brave trust. The kind where you let go not because you've given up, but because you've finally woken up. You see, there's a difference between striving and aligning. Striving without alignment, that's survival mode. That's waking up every day in a panic, trying to outrun uncertainty. It's exhausting, it's reactive, and worst of all, it's disconnected from your deeper truth. But when you begin to trust not in outcomes, But in your own presence, something shifts. You stop micromanaging every moment. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to control. And in that space, peace has room to breathe. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Let that sit for a second. Because many of us live in reaction to patterns we don't even see. We cling to control because we fear the discomfort of uncertainty. We chase outcomes, not because we want them, but because we're afraid of what happens if we don't. Socrates, in his quiet brilliance, encouraged us to examine our lives, to stop living on autopilot, to ask the harder questions. Why am I holding on so tightly? What am I afraid will happen if I let go? And most importantly, what part of me doesn't yet feel safe without control? That's not weakness. That's deep awareness. When you begin to trust the rhythm of life, you move from force to flow. You're no longer driven by fear, you're guided by presence. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can hold together. And you start honoring yourself for simply showing up authentically, calmly, courageously. So no, trust isn't the easy path, it's the higher one. It requires patience when you want answers, stillness when you want action, and faith when everything in you is screaming for control. But trust, real trust, brings a quiet kind of freedom. And that freedom is where your true strength lives. Have you ever noticed how some of your clearest thoughts come not when you're trying to figure things out, but when you finally stop trying? It's strange, isn't it? We spend so much of life in motion, rushing from one task to another, jumping from one thought to the next, believing that movement equals progress. That if we're not actively doing something, we must be falling behind. But here's the truth. The world often forgets. Stillness isn't a pause in life. It's where life begins to speak. Plato once taught that a well-lived life is one of balance and intention, not just action for the sake of action, but movement that is guided, anchored in purpose. And yet, most of us are rarely still long enough to hear our own inner guidance. Stillness doesn't mean doing nothing. It doesn't mean disengaging or giving up. Stillness means creating space. Space for awareness. Space for breath. Space for something deeper to rise. Have you ever sat quietly and suddenly remembered something important? Felt an unexpected emotion? Or received a kind of clarity you didn't even know you were searching for? That's the power of stillness. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't push. It invites. And that's exactly why it's so often overlooked in a world obsessed with noise. But the Stoics, they knew better. They understood that inner clarity doesn't come through endless striving, it comes through presence, through learning to sit with the chaos without becoming it. In fact, Marcus Aurelius himself wrote that, "Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Think about that. You don't need to run away to the mountains. You don't need to escape your life. You just need to come back to yourself. Because in that silence, you can finally hear the difference between what's urgent and what's essential, between what's loud and what's true. And when you get quiet, you start to see clearly not just the world, but your own place within it. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, like you're spinning in 1,000 directions, don't just reach for another task or distraction. Try stillness, even if it's just for a moment, even if your mind resists it. Because clarity doesn't always come from effort. Sometimes it comes from allowing. And what you find in that still space might just be the insight you've been chasing all along. Let me ask you something personal. How often have you told yourself, "I just need to try harder"? When things aren't working, when you feel stuck, drained, disconnected, the default response is almost always push more, do more, force it to happen. But what if more effort isn't the answer? What if what you actually need is less force and more allowing? See, we're trained to believe that growth comes from grinding, from hustle, from tightening our grip. And while hard work has its place, it can become a trap if we keep applying it to things that are no longer meant for us. Here's the truth. Not everything is yours to carry. Not everything needs to be forced. Some doors are meant to close. Some seasons are meant to pass. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop chasing and start allowing. Allowing doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means learning to trust your alignment more than your anxiety. It's choosing presence over pressure. It's recognizing when something no longer feels right and letting it go. Not because it failed, but because you're growing beyond it. And the moment you release what's not aligned, something beautiful happens. You get your energy back. It's subtle at first, like a quiet exhale, like a space opening inside you where the tension used to live. But then you start to notice you're sleeping better, thinking clearer, laughing more, feeling again. Because energy isn't just about how much coffee you drink or how many hours you sleep. Energy is tied to alignment. When your soul is in the wrong room, it drains you. When your actions fight your intuition, you feel light in your body, your heart, your mind. But when you allow, when you stop swimming against the current and let the river guide you, life begins to speak. Not through noise, but through nudges, through intuition, through those small, quiet moments that whisper, this way, not that. You've had those moments, haven't you? A sudden clarity while walking in silence, a gut feeling that said no before your mind could catch up. A deep calm when you finally said, I'm done trying to force this. That's life speaking. That's your deeper wisdom emerging. But you can only hear it when you stop shouting over it. So maybe today's invitation is this. Instead of asking, what more can I do? Ask, what can I let go of? Because allowing isn't weakness. It's wisdom in motion. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is finally stop fighting what's already trying to find you. Let's be honest for a moment. How many of us are performing more than we're actually living? It's subtle, isn't it? You wake up and feel like you have to prove something, your value, your progress, your purpose, to your boss, your family, your friends, sometimes even to yourself. We live in a world that makes it almost impossible to just be. You're expected to always be building something, fixing something, becoming something. And if you're not, the silence can feel like failure. But here's the thing no one really says out loud. Chronic performance isn't strength. It's survival. We're not hustling because we're inspired. We're hustling because somewhere deep down, we've equated stillness with worthlessness. And it's exhausting. We confuse burnout with discipline. We label constant overthinking as commitment. But neither is true. They're symptoms of a deeper wounded belief that who we are is not enough unless we're constantly producing or impressing. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That one line explains so much. Because most of our proving comes from old, unspoken beliefs we never questioned. Maybe someone told you directly or indirectly that you had to earn love. That rest was lazy. That your value lived in what you do, not who you are. And so you began to perform. You became the reliable one, the high achiever, the perfectionist. You learned how to shine on the outside while silently eroding on the inside. But the Stoics had a different idea. They believed in inner alignment, not outward applause. In presence over performance. In living with intention, not for validation. They understood that real strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the kind of strength that doesn't beg to be seen, but is felt in how you carry yourself. So ask yourself, who are you when no one's watching? When the accolades fall silent? When there's no one left to impress? That version of you that's the one worth returning to. Because your value has never lived in your productivity. It lives in your presence. In your honesty. In your quiet decision to choose peace over performance. Let go of the hustle culture lie that you have to prove anything. You don't. You were never meant to be a brand. You were meant to be a person. Have you ever worked so hard and still felt empty? You gave it everything, your time, your energy, your mind, but instead of fulfillment, all you felt was fatigue. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not broken. See? Effort alone isn't the problem. It's misaligned effort that leads to suffering. Most of us were raised on the idea that success is simply about hard work. Just keep pushing, just keep grinding. But nobody talks about the quality of that effort, about where it's coming from. Because effort rooted in fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough, that kind of energy might get results, but it always costs us something deeper: our peace. Socrates once said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." And Aristotle believed that the highest human good is not productivity, but eudaimonia, a deep sense of flourishing that comes from living with purpose, with virtue, with alignment. So ask yourself, is your effort driven by panic or by purpose? Are you chasing meaning or just escaping discomfort? That distinction is everything. Because when you're aligned, when your actions reflect your values, your truth effort becomes peaceful. Even the hard days carry a quiet satisfaction. You still work, you still show up, but it's no longer from a place of pressure. It's from presence. That's what trust does. Trust transforms the quality of how you act. You stop grasping. You start flowing. You begin to move from clarity, not desperation. But let's be honest, trust takes courage. It means slowing down long enough to ask the hard questions. Why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? What would I still choose, even if no one clapped? That's where alignment lives. It's not always loud. It's not always glamorous, but it's honest. And it creates a kind of energy that hustle alone could never generate. You don't need to burn out to prove your dedication. You don't need to run faster to be worthy. You just need to move in the direction that feels true, even if it's slower, quieter, or less understood. Because alignment isn't about doing less. It's about doing what matters with your whole heart. And in a world that tells you to run harder, choosing alignment is a revolutionary act. You know what's wild? Most of us spend our entire lives looking outside for answers, when the truest ones are always whispering within. The ancient philosophers understood this. Carl Jung called it the path of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world expects you to be. Plato believed that wisdom wasn't poured into us by others, it was already inside, waiting to be remembered. And Aristotle? He taught that living well isn't about appearing good, it's about aligning your soul with what is good, real, and just. But none of that can happen when we're drowning in noise. And today, noise is everywhere. Scrolling, comparing, performing, we're constantly tuned into everyone else's voice and slowly forgetting the sound of our own. That's why stillness is so powerful. Not because it's trendy, not because it looks peaceful on a wellness retreat flyer, but because stillness is where your real self finally has room to speak. It's in the quiet that your truth starts to rise, not the version shaped by fear or approval, but the one born from clarity and self-honesty. Have you ever had a moment, maybe just 5 minutes of silence, where you felt something shift inside you? Like a thought you've ignored for months suddenly became loud. Or a subtle knowing, something you couldn't quite explain, suddenly just clicked? That's the awakening I'm talking about. And it doesn't come from striving. It doesn't come from pretending. It comes from listening inward, listening honestly. Because the truth is chasing external validation will always keep you running. But listening to your inner compass? That's where peace lives. That's where you stop performing and start aligning. Where you stop wondering who you're supposed to be and start becoming who you already are underneath all the noise. It's not easy. Sometimes, what we hear in the silence is uncomfortable. Doubts, fears, regrets. But if we sit with them not to fix, but to understand, they often point us back to something deeper, something truer. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. You don't have to chase greatness. You just have to return to truth. And in that return, in that quiet unfolding of your own voice, you awaken. Not by force, not through striving, but through the radical act of listening to what's always been there. So after all the striving, all the pushing, all the proving, what's left? Silence. And in that silence, something sacred. Yourself. Trust, in its purest form, isn't loud. It doesn't wave a flag or demand attention. Trust is coming home not to a place, but to a part of you that was never lost, only buried under layers of expectation, fear, and performance. You see, the privilege of a lifetime, like Carl Jung said, is becoming who you truly are. Not what the world wants, not what social media applauds, but your raw, real, whole. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to be everything, you finally make space for what matters. When you stop performing, what's real can finally show up. Love, connection, purpose, peace. Think about it. When was the last time you gave yourself permission to just be? Not to impress, not to optimize, just to be. We're all so conditioned to perform, we don't even notice it. Even rest has become a productivity hack. Even healing is something we feel pressure to do correctly. But what if you laid all that down? What if you chose to believe that you don't need to prove your worth? That the quiet part of you, the one that feels deeply, thinks slowly, trusts gently is already enough? That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's what the Stoics, the mystics, the philosophers were all pointing to in their own ways. Peace isn't something you achieve. It's something you return to. And that return starts with a letting go. Letting go of the race. Letting go of the noise. Letting go of the need to constantly explain or justify who you are. Because the truth is, you don't owe anyone a performance. You owe yourself the truth. So if you take nothing else from this video, let it be this. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And that journey back to yourself? That's the real success. That's the quiet freedom no one can give you because it was always yours. Let it unfold. Let it guide you. And let peace, true, unshakable peace be the home you keep returning to